Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. Marty, Sam, Kevin, and myself have a good friend of ours joining us as a guest host for this episode. Sarah is going to be with us to discuss the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, so we're really happy to have Sarah join us. Be sure to stick around for some Terminator trivia at the end. All right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
Oh, so I'm really excited today that we've got somebody joining us. It's not just the four of us talking about the same old stuff all the time. We've got Sarah with us, who is a science fiction fan and a knowledgeable science fiction aficionado, and super happy to have her here.
Hello.
So we're gonna start off right away and just chat about some interesting things that are happening in the science fiction, science fact world. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but there was an announcement that some scientists or people who pay attention to near-Earth objects discovered 2 big asteroids. And I guess this is fairly common, but these 2 asteroids in particular are quite close to Earth, like very much accessible by some type of rocketry. And they have an astounding amount of metal in them, like to the point where one of these 2 asteroids has more than all of current Earth's reserves of nickel, iron, and copper. So if we wanted to go and do mining, they've just pointed in the direction of 2 amazing candidates. I don't know. What do you guys think about this?
Jeff Bezos has dollar signs in his eyes going around in circles.
Yeah, I've heard of this, and I have some concerns. I mean, wouldn't that just flood it would just crash the Earth economy, wouldn't it? If suddenly we flooded it with like such enormous amounts of stuff that has been, particularly valuable until now, but like it just won't be valuable if there's that much available. Isn't that sort of the way it works?
I think that would be true if it was something like gold, where it doesn't have a ton of value to us. Like it's not usable to us. It's not practical. But iron and copper, I mean, that's practical, right? We could use it. I mean, lowering those prices, I think, would just make it more accessible, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it takes the extraction off Earth, right? And I like the idea of putting it somewhere else. I don't mind space mining as well. Further to that point, like as long as it doesn't prolong the use of fossil fuels on Earth, like, you know what I mean? Like if there was some industry that propped up on some asteroid that suddenly enabled the prolonged use of something that was already destroying the planet, then that's where I get iffy about it. But yeah, that's a really good, the economy side of it too is a really interesting piece. Like what kind of trouble do we create for ourselves? But it is a really inviting idea. Like it does seem like maybe we take some of the damaging extraction that we have on Earth and put it on a lifeless rock, that's just nearby. And that seems a lot more, at first blush, at least, seems pretty attractive.
But also, I believe, those resources will be used to build and leave in space too, right? For any space stations or anything out there. Why mine it and bring it back to Earth? It'll be, that might happen, but I believe they're really going to want to just mine and turn this into something that can be used out in space, because getting it out into space is very expensive. You don't want to bring metals to Earth, manufacture parts, and then send them to space if you can just manufacture them in space.
Yeah.
Like floating colonies at 50 kilometers up in Venus's atmosphere, like Carl Schrader said at Fan Expo.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Well, it strikes me that, it's probably doesn't make sense to bring this metal to Earth because mining is a bottom of the barrel expense kind of industry, right? Like they have removed all possible expense, and that's why they're so dirty and polluting and horrible for planet Earth, is because they do it so cheaply, as cheaply as possible with 50, 100 years of development of, the chemistry and what they need to extract things on Earth, that I just can't see how you could do it cheaper in space and then also bring it back here, right? That any ore that you mine on Earth will necessarily be a lot cheaper than ore that you mine in space, probably. But that means probably, that this will become viable only when you actually calculate the costs to the environment of mining on Earth, right? And then if you can actually export or get away from any of those pollution costs in space, then that would make it an economically feasible economic activity, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe mining plus smelting, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and plus the economic or the environmental cost, add all those costs together, then it might start to make sense when we get the technology there. But can you imagine just how cool it would be if you've got some smelted iron ore or aluminum or something, and they just chuck it down into Earth's gravity well, and they time it at just such a time that it lands in, I don't know, the desert in Utah, or someplace like that. And they just, every now and again, every week, you see this huge multi-ton chunk of metal floating down from space, not floating, falling straight down and making this ungodly crash when it hits the ground. Right? That'd be exciting.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll put parachutes on it.
Who is the insurance company that is covering that operation? Because you do not want to be that company.
Also, it kind of makes sense to build on that asteroid as well, right? To not just be like, oh, we're going to take stuff away from it and take it somewhere else. You kind of set up shop on that asteroid.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that correct?
It's a good idea. Become a manufacturing facility and just chuck stuff around the solar system. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I have a science fiction, science fact topic I wanted to discuss. I recently finished watching this documentary on Netflix called Countdown: Inspiration for Mission to Space. And this is a mission by SpaceX that just came home a couple weeks ago, I think. And I was really blown away by what they did. This is the first civilian crew to go up in full orbit, right? This isn't just sort of like a joyride up to 100 kilometers and back. These guys went for 3 days and around the planet Earth 38 times. And it's just a really interesting notion that they did. They wanted to prove that you don't need military trained pilots to be astronauts. So they got 4 civilians together, and they recruited each civilian under a different theme: leadership, hope, generosity, and prosperity. And leadership was this guy named Jared Isaacman. So he's the founder and CEO of Shift4 Payments. So this is some company that he made a lot of money on, and he's used that money to become an accomplished aviator and adventurer. He's actually, can fly a jet airplane, one of the few civilians I think who ever has. So he was the leader of the team. But then what they did is they decided that for the theme of hope, they decided to have the biggest charity fundraiser, I think, ever, raised over $200 million for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. And so the spokesperson they got for that part of the mission was this woman named Haley Arsenault, and she's a childhood cancer survivor. And she was inspired after her experience, as a child at that hospital to become a nurse, and that's where she works now. And so they just called her and said, hey, you want to go to space? We'd like you to represent, the hope and be the representative for St. Jude's Children's Hospital and the fundraising. So that's kind of amazing. She's also the youngest person ever to go to space. I think she's 28, really, young. And then the other amazing person that they got for the theme of generosity, they just had a lottery. And if you donated to St. Jude's Children's Hospital, they put your name in a lottery to be on the crew. And so this guy, Chris Sembrowski, he donated one day without even really thinking about it, and then got a call a few months later saying, hey, you've won the lottery. Want to go to space? And he chose to do so. And he's just, a regular Joe with a regular job and a family. And so he joined the team. And finally, for prosperity, there was a competition. You had to put it together, a YouTube video, making your pitch. And there's this woman, Dr. Sian Proctor, who is an entrepreneur. So that's the prosperity aspect. But she actually made it to the finals of to become an astronaut. but didn't quite make the cut years ago. And she's always been inspired to go to space. Her father worked on the monitoring station on Guam, and he was responsible for actually guiding the Apollo 11 mission to Earth. And so it's a big deal for her family and for her, a lifelong goal to go to space. So she was chosen, and they trained these guys for 5 months on everything a regular astronaut would do except an EVA. So they didn't train on extravehicular activity, and they did it. They went to space. They spent 3 days there. They came back, and they're alive and well to tell the tale. So, what do you guys think of that?
I can't believe that they raised $200 million for this hospital. That's absolutely phenomenal. And that idea of one of the lucky donors getting a spot on it. What a brilliant marketing idea and fundraising idea.
Absolutely, yeah.
In fact, as I understand it, they're having a difficult time filling seats on some of their tourist ones. Like, I guess they canceled one because they weren't able to get billionaires to decide to go up. I guess after they had issues with the toilet in that when they went around last time. I'm not entirely sure the details of that, nor do I necessarily want to know the details. But if they can't fill, if they can't put butts in seats into their things, maybe they should do like a 50-50 draw, where 50% of all of the tickets purchased goes to some charity, 50% goes to SpaceX to cover their costs, and you have a chance of getting on it, like a 1 in 100,000, 100, 200,000 chance. I'd pay $25-$50 to be in that lottery.
Yeah.
Me too.
Well, and I do think they have a public relations problem right now, right? With what's happened in the last year, with the billionaires going to space, with people's public opinion is sort of turned against this because it does look like a joyride for millionaires, and that shouldn't be the point, and it isn't the point. And technology development, should be the focus here. So this mission, the whole point of this mission was to sort of counteract that perception and show that like regular everyday people can go to space, so that one day we can actually send hundreds or thousands of people to colonize somewhere. So, I think it was the right PR move with everything they did here, with the lottery, with, the charity, with the choices they made of the crew. And it was great. Anyway, I should also say this Netflix documentary, it's a 5-part documentary, I think. And they just showed the whole thing, right from the time these people were chosen, how the program was put together, their training, and going up on the mission and coming back. And it was really well done. I think they really hit. SpaceX is doing a great job of the PR that needs to be done right now.
But I feel like I haven't heard of it. Like I didn't feel like it made the splash that Bezos did, and Bezos, they come down like fools and chomping on cigars and wearing cowboy hats. I was like, Jesus, and here's a bigger accomplishment. 38 orbits and a proof of concept that you can put amateurs in spaces, which is what you need to do in order to have a viable future that will be of any use to us all as a planet. And yet it's gone under the radar. I feel like it's I don't understand that.
Yeah,
it's possible that's why they did. Well, I'm not sure if they were planning on this being on Netflix, but I watched it. A couple live clips, or at least clips that were a few hours old on YouTube when they were up there. But I only knew about that because of a friend of mine who said, watch this. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have seen it. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have known until now, Marty, you talking about the documentary. But the thing that I thought was interesting about that group is they looked like they were having an amazing time. They looked like a really cool group of people that were actually in it together, and they were exploring the different corners of the shuttle they were on, and it was really cool. Like the dome that they had to look out, and the corridors, or I don't even know if you call it that, but whatever, how the tunnels that they go to get to different parts of their craft. It was really, really neat. It made me want to be in there. It almost felt like being in like remember in the 80s, the McDonald's playground, like the Hamburglar? You would climb up the thing and then you'd wind up it was almost like being in one of those in space, which I would climb into no problem.
It would be fun.
It was cool.
After all the vomiting and all that kind of stuff.
I think if you're gonna do it, this is the way to do it.
Right.
It's probably still pretty problematic for a few reasons, but I prefer this, like, where people didn't even know about it, to like some showy, disgusting display of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, amazing if someday we are a spacefaring civilization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And getting regular people able to do it that sounds awesome.
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. Like, you've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune in to 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty essential. I think part of the reason we didn't hear about it is, frankly, it was just the timing with William Shatner going to space and back. And so I think it was around the same time, or they were maybe a week before. And, the media splash that William Shatner made might have just overshadowed the SpaceX mission.
All right, so Marty made us depressed for the last 30 days. Let's talk about it.
All right, I made you read a very dark book, but an amazing book. So last month, my choice was to read N.K. Jemisin's The Fifth Season, which is the first book of a trilogy called the Broken Earth Trilogy. It was highly celebrated. Each book won a Hugo Award, and then the third book also won Nebula on top of the Hugo. So I think that has never happened before for every book of a trilogy. I loved it when I read it a couple years ago. I credit it with bringing me back into reading a lot of sci-fi. I, devoured the rest of the trilogy then, and I've now read the first and second book again a second time. And I loved it just as much, if not more, the second time. But I do appreciate that the first book is considerably darker than the others, and it was a little harsh. It starts hard, it ends hard, with a very difficult middle with the child at the node station. Oof. So this is a dark, heavy book. But for me, when I read it, I was just amazed with the world building. I thought it was just so new, so different. She drops you into this sort of world where you don't quite know what's going on. It's pretty radically different. It definitely borders onto fantasy, especially the first book, more than sci-fi, and you sort of realize it's actually a far future world that you're living in, and it sort of becomes more science fiction throughout the series. But I was just blown away by the quality of the writing. I was blown away by the world building and the characters. I thought it was really, because it's so emotionally intense and it sort of puts you through the ringer. For me, that brought me a lot closer to the characters in it. And so I thought it was just a masterful piece of writing. And I didn't mind that it was so dark. We've read some other books like Blind Sight, right? So Peter Watts' Blind Sight. I hated being in that world. I thought it sucked. I was like, oh, okay, I gotta go to Peter Watts's dark vampire in space bizarro world now, and it just wasn't my thing. Whereas this, even though it was probably a darker and world with harder aspects to it, I didn't feel that it was hard to be there. I loved getting into the world. I loved reading it. The pages melted away for me. And I'm really excited to, I loved reading the second book a second time, and I'm really excited to go on and finish the third book as well. So I'd love to hear what you guys think about it, and only if you really loved it. If you didn't, then Tristan, you can go home.
Well, I wouldn't mind making a new observation, or at least explaining a new observation I've had with this book. So it's dark, and one thing, it involves children. So those two things are hard for any person, especially parents. Um, Also, I cannot relate to the amount of suffering that a lot of these characters have faced. And I'm not supposed to, or I don't have to, but the book helps me get there a little bit closer. Something I'd like to kind of relate to, maybe this is a little bit too dark, but um, right now in Canada, we're watching something horrific happen, and we're digging up the corpses of children from Indigenous communities. And the church, the Catholic Church, hasn't really said anything about this, but they have murdered thousands and thousands of children, and I think we're over 7,000 children now that have been found in these unmarked graves
At residential schools.
of residential schools. Now, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to make that a part of my daily life, but I have to. Because it's a part of our past, and we've got to. Hopefully, something really happens in terms of the church coming out and doing something about this. But the church back then was horrible, and what they have done to an entire culture is horrible. So when it comes to N.K. Jemisin's book, The Fifth Season, I kind of see this. They kind of align for me in a way where I don't want to hear about children suffering, which we get in this book. It's a dark world I don't really want to be in. It's not a fun adventure, but I recognize that, and I want to experience it so that I'm not ignorant. And I think that there's a lot that Jemisin put into this book that has to do with the oppression of people that are not privileged, like many of us are. So it's not my favorite kind of book, but I give it a lot of credit for the ability to teach me things. And also just her writing is beautiful. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Well, it should be mentioned that N.K. Jemisin is a Black woman, and she, there haven't been a lot of Black women in science fiction. Octavia Butler, of course, and we discussed Nala Hopkinson the other day, and I'm sure there's some others, but she has certainly made a huge mark with this book, and sort of made a big impact on science fiction. And yeah, I think it's pretty clear that she is writing about the oppression of Black people and throughout history, and in a sort of distilled, intense way, where this book is a book about orogenes. So there's a special kind of person in this far future dystopia that is able to influence the earth, is able to use energy to stop or start earthquakes. And so these powerful people, have been sort of enslaved by the rest of humanity in order to control them. So this is an essay on some difficult topics, and topics we don't address too often here as four white guys, and I think we should. And it's kind of good for us, I think, to tackle some of the more difficult themes in this book, and be confronted by them, and be moved by them, and discuss them.
I thought the writing was fantastic, and I didn't take it in those terms, when I first read it, because I didn't really put take the author in context of what they were writing about. So for me, I came into it cold, just reading a fantasy novel, and I'm into fantasy novels. My gateway into sci-fi was fantasy, and pretty dark fantasy at that. I thought the writing here was fantastic, and the device that she used to bring the storylines to their conclusion was a clinic on how to write a good ending. For me, though, I struggled a bit with the world building. I think it felt a little forced for me at times. It lacked a dimension that I'm not quite able to put my finger on. And it was dark enough that in a way that didn't feel complete, that I'm not sure I feel entirely compelled to go back. But after hearing some of the discussions that we've all had on this book and in this context, I'm willing to give it another go. But in some cases, all the characters felt a little bit one note for me, and in a certain case for good reason. But there was no one that I really came to care a great deal about, in character wise, and so the stakes felt a lot lower for me as a result. Uh, but so, at the end of it, my feelings on this are pretty mixed. I've seen and read enough trilogies to know that some really sort of hit their stride in later books. And I'll have to take your word for it that this is one of those, and I'll give it another go, I think. But yeah, I definitely struggled with this one. It wasn't something that pulled me along. I kind of had to push myself to finish.
I love this book. I'd never heard about this author before, and I just found it so compelling. And right away, I was like, "Oh, this is allegory for enslaved people and marginalized people." There's even a racial slur that they use for these orogenes. I don't even want to say it because it's so obviously a racial slur. It's the R word.
Yeah.
And it's just I'm mostly through the second book now, and it just gets so good. I really enjoyed the first book. Character study wise, like I was invested in the characters, and I really appreciated the twists and the mystery that is revealed at the end. Very, very dark. The same things happen and have happened throughout the world's history of colonialism, and people have to make hard decisions, and I just felt this is a really good kind of fable version of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second book is less so. I loved having that foundation of the first book, because I think all that's important information for the story and of this world. I thought some of the landscapes, they're all very kind of dreary and terrible, and I really felt the words she used were great for putting me in that kind of horrible dying earth situation. And I loved it, and I can't wait to read the third.
Yeah,
I was kind of the same. I read through the full series fairly quickly, and it was dreary. But I didn't, at the time, I remember not thinking it was super dreary. It was through rereading it that I realized that it was. And I think that the best way I would describe it is that her world building is very internally consistent. Like if there exists a world that is constantly being demolished and rebuilt and demolished and rebuilt, how could society exist? And this is where she brought in the idea of the religion of things are written in stone. These are the rules that you follow if things start to go badly, if there's quakes, if there's volcanic eruptions, and you close up the walls, you store your food, and I thought that was kind of brilliant from a world building perspective. The world didn't have spaceships, and it didn't have time travel, and it didn't have that kind of stuff. But so from that perspective, very much as you guys have said, it is more fantasy-ish. But I enjoyed it. It got me to read the whole series, and definitely amazingly well written. And as you say, Sarah, the allegory for oppressed people and enslavement, it's very clear, and it's so nice that those that are enslaved or disempowered are actually astoundingly powerful, right? Like that, I thought that was a really neat way to approach that story, was that the origins are actually, the most powerful people on the planet, and yet they are disempowered in terms of how they're treated in society. Anyway, I too thought it was great. Highly recommend the book. Excellent series.
So does the series turn more into an adventure then as we go along? Because you're on a journey in the first book, which is the only book that I've read in the series, but do you get more of an adventure? Do you go different places, or does the plot thicken?
I'd say it's more like a quest than a journey. Like there's not too much movement, but there's definitely like this end goal that they're working towards and getting closer and closer. But I mean, it is super character heavy as well. Like it's
Right.
all about those people.
Yeah.
There is one magical place that most of the story takes place in. That's really cool. But yeah,
In the second book.
yeah, second book.
Yeah, I would say so. It's not so. I mean, the first book is very much a journey, right? The second book is not a journey. They sort of stop moving and stay in one place. But yes, since the words dreary and dark and heavy have been used, I would like to encourage our readers that it's not. It changes, right? The second book is not as heavy and it's not as dark. I mean, it's the same characters, and so you're carrying the first book with you. But the second book, I would say, is much more about the world building. She sort of explains a lot of in kind of a increasingly, right. There's this opening of a fairly scientific account of why this world is like that, but it's fairly slow. At the end of this first book, she drops this enormous hint. She says, have you ever heard of something called the moon? And I remember the first time I read that book, I was like, what about the moon? Wait, I hadn't thought about the moon at all. And that's the point. She doesn't really reveal anything in the first book about why the mechanics of this world, what happened. And so in the second book, you start to learn about, okay, what is the history? What happened to this world? Why is it broken? And it has something to do with the moon. And if you sort of, know some planetary mechanics and celestial mechanics, that's basically all you need to know. In that first book, at the end, you realize like, it's to do with the moon. Okay, I understand everything. Now I know where the seasons come from. I don't know how much I guess we've gone there. So the moon has been lost. So that the technology, right, that these people developed, this ancient civilization that these, that has developed this incredibly powerful, massive technology, and they used it for energy, but they screwed up and they lost the moon. So the moon has gone off orbit basically, and it keeps coming back, but at erratic times. So the moon is now in an erratic, much longer elliptical orbit. And so what happens to the Earth when suddenly, it doesn't have another planetary body going around it in any regular fashion, but it comes crashing, flying through and zipping around every few hundred years. And that would do what that would make the planet that she describes in this book. And it's kind of a simple mechanism, but actually this is what I love about this book, or certainly what blew me away the first time. It's just the scale of the thinking, right? I like big ideas. I like the power. I like the, big spaceships, time machines, whatever it is, but I've never encountered a world that kind of surprised me as much as this one in terms of the ambition of the size of thought. Like, we lost the moon, right? Like we did something to the moon and screwed up the planet. Like it has never crossed my mind that could happen. Hopefully it can't. But to be thinking in such big terms, right, in such monstrous energies and powers, and that these powers are basically being channeled by human beings, I think that's part of what really drew me to the world building in the series. So yes, the second book is more about that. It's explaining more. You're in this wonderful, fantastic place that they find, and so you start to understand this technology that's been left by this ancient civilization. And then the third book, now I haven't reread it.
And the second book is The Obelisk Gate.
That's
and
right.
The third book is
The Stone Sky.
The Stone Sky. That's right. Thank you. And in the third book, I mean, I love the third book more than any of them, and it's because the payoff is all there. So I loved being revealed more and more about this world. And in the third book, she just like really takes you there. She takes you right to that ancient civilization. She shows you what happened. She explains the technology that they've all sort of been trying to figure out and dance around. So I remember the third book as being a really great payoff. Like you've really sort of invested yourself in this world, and then she answers all your questions, and she takes you to the places you've been sort of wanting to hear about. And she, really, it's a great finish. It really wraps up the whole series. And I will also say, so if the first book, you were turned off of because it ended hard and it started hard, there's a lot more of the classic sort of payoffs in the second book. The person you want to die, I won't say anymore. There's this cathartic release when bad guys die. And so, she said that happens, and that's great. And there's a bit of a payoff in terms of characters in the second book. But then in the third book, she resolves the story. Like, it all comes together, and there is triumph at the end, and there is heroism, and there is, somebody pulling off this incredible thing. And so, I think it was emotionally very, because it was so fraught and dark and difficult at the beginning, that by the time you get to the end, it's just that much more sweet when there is triumph and success. So I would recommend, if you've invested the time and effort in reading the first book, that you finish the series to get to the payoff.
Fine.
There you go. All right.
Add it to the list.
That's right. Cool.
Well, Sarah is more than halfway there, so she's going to beat us to it, and Kevin's already done it.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Cool.
Very good.
Well, this month we're going to be reading Ancestral Night by Elizabeth Bear.
Nice.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Love Elizabeth Bear. I'm excited.
And she's coming on the show, so all the more reason to read in and read our audience in as well. It's a space opera, so that got me, and covers a lot of great subgenres within that. And so it's a routine salvage mission goes terribly wrong in deep space. So, anyways, I won't share anything further, but I have started. I'm about maybe my Kobo says I think 10%, and I'm hooked already. So really enjoying it, and I hope all of you do as well.
Cool.
So I've already dug in a little bit, and I'm loving it. It's reminding me of a few books we've read.
I just finished reading Dust by Elizabeth Bear, and on Marty's recommendation, and then I finished Chill, which is her second one in that series.
Oh, you finished it? Okay.
Yeah,
good.
and
halfway through that one.
Oh yeah, and I mean the prose are excellent. She just writes really neat metaphors, and the way she writes is so. I'm so excited you picked Elizabeth Bear, and it's funny that you mentioned to FTL, like whether to FTL or not, right? That's a big question for sci-fi authors, and in this series she doesn't. Like, they're generation ships, and so that's what the whole story is about. Anyway, so I'm excited about this book, Sam.
That's the Jacob's Ladder trilogy. That is Dust, Chill, and Grail. I think is the next one. Yeah. Well, the very first review on the very first page of Ancestral Night is impressive at the core. Readers who relished the Jacob's Ladder trilogy will certainly enjoy this one. So, I guess this one's the right one for you. Hey, I looked up space opera on Wikipedia because it's actually pretty interesting. A space opera is a subgenre of science fiction that emphasizes science fictional space warfare with use of melodramatic, risk-taking space adventures and chivalric romance. Set mainly or entirely in outer space, it features technological and social advancements, or lack thereof, in faster-than-light travel, futuristic weapons, and sophisticated technology on backdrop of galactic empires and interstellar wars with fictional aliens, often in fictional galaxies. The term has, this is for you, Tristan, no relation to music, as in a traditional opera. But here's the thing I didn't know. This is great. But is instead a play on the terms soap opera, a melodramatic television series, and horse opera, which was coined during the 1930s to indicate a cliched and formulaic Western movie. So there you go. Space opera actually comes from horse opera and soap opera.
Right, obviously.
That makes more sense. Yeah.
I still want to edit that entry. It's Wikipedia, right? Let's take it. Let's take it where we want.
Take it over. I was going to say, it sounds good. I want to read whatever that's describing.
Well, it's what they all are now, though, right? Like,
it's true.
Some are just more real than others. It's just the level. I mean, it's almost, if you get too out of the realm of science that exists today, your space opera, but you can still have all the same elements and be based in something that can be explained in science, like a Bear or a Carl Schrader book. And now you're not space opera. I don't know.
Then you're hard sci-fi, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I
Depends on
think
prose as well.
to be a space opera, you do need that adventure, chivalric romance, and melodrama, right? Like those are the actual things that make it a space opera. I mean, we haven't read until Shards of Earth. We hadn't read any space operas, and we read a lot of books, but none of them felt like a space opera.
Well, Becky Chambers would have been a space opera, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I want more storylines. I think for me, space opera has multiple storylines, like more than you're following. Like Becky Chambers, you're kind of following like three characters going from one end of space to another, and it becomes more of a space opera as you get into more of her books. But again, these are sort of standalone stories for her trilogy. So I actually wouldn't quite qualify it as a real space opera. I would, for me, the starting point is that I've got multiple storylines that don't always converge, and some do, and maybe they all do at one point. But I'm in the same on a large scale universe, and I'm following multiple storylines that converge and divert and that sort of thing. So that to me is where you get into, I think, in terms of storyline and story devices and character building and world building, that I think those are sort of key elements that are left out of that Wikipedia description.
My experience with sci-fi is mostly just going to the thrift store and finding the most ridiculous cover I could find.
Perfect.
So I don't know if I've read enough to really define it. There was the very steamy chapter in the book we just reviewed, though. Does that qualify it as a... You know what I'm talking about? That one chapter where it's all nothing but humping?
Yeah. There's some serious...
Does that qualify it?
No.
It reminded me more of what I imagined a Harlequin book would be like.
Yeah. From the description, it doesn't seem like something I'd be into, but who knows?
Yeah, it's not my first choice. I mean, I think Peter F. Hamilton is probably the best example of space opera I know of, and I loved his books. But there was a time in my life when I could handle that. I think part of loving space opera is also being able to embrace thousands and thousands of pages of reading the same world and story, right? That, like you were saying, Sam, it's the interlocking narratives and storylines, and so that just takes a lot of pages to really flesh out a space opera world.
Yeah, definitely. For trivia this week, this week I can say, we're going to do Terminator. I felt like we met Robert Patrick at Fan Expo, and that sort of inspired some Terminator driven trivia for us. And so
is this the Terminator franchise?
Yeah, this is I couldn't pull off of just one movie. It gets in the weeds, and I was like, oh, no one's going to get any of these questions. So again, from trivia.com, and I had to go through a few of their lists to pull this together, because some of the trivia questions were like, what was the ATM number of whatever, so-and-so's, whatever, or the name of the store they bought their guns at. And I was like, no one's going to know this stuff. So I'll try. We'll see how we do. So I pulled out what I thought or hope are some of the more accessible questions. And I'll start off with number one. The Terminator steals some clothes off some punks who now a much bigger star. Well, was a much bigger star.
Bill Paxton.
Yes. Oh, nicely done. Okay. Maybe this is all for you, Tristan.
Again. Well, that one really stood out. I was a big Bill Paxton fan. And when he passed, it was actually kind of heartbreaking that he was just so young. But he played in a few James Cameron movies, and that was his first as just like a very tiny part. Yeah. But yeah, it's awesome.
In the future, how do they detect the T-800s?
A scanner.
It's low tech.
Infrared?
No.
Low tech.
Trained bees?
Close.
Really?
Dogs?
Yes.
Dogs.
Ooh.
Wow.
Or there's like the German Shepherds, and they go nuts. Like to get into the bunker, you've got to, pass by a couple dogs, and then the one dog goes nuts. And anyways, yeah.
Oh, okay.
All right. So, on what date, long since passed, so maybe to your relief, does Skynet become self-aware?
Oh, yeah.
1997, I think.
I think it was 97. Yeah.
Yeah. But what was it? August 13th.
Man, you're so close.
Oh,
That
really?
was-
How
yeah.
did you get that? Wow.
I don't know what it is. Yeah, it's August 29th, 1997 at 2:14 a.m.
There you go.
There's an auspicious date.
And what are the first words that T101 says to Sarah?
Which one's the
T101.
T101? Which one's
Yeah.
that? Anybody know?
Oh,
Is that
no. Come with me if you want to live.
Yes.
Was in all of them. Is that what it was?
Yeah, that's what it was.
Oh, well,
Oh,
there
okay.
you go. If it was in all of them,
Who's T101 though? Is that Schwarzenegger?
is that the
Yeah,
original?
it's isn't it like the rebooted version of him?
Like in the second one, during in Terminator 2?
Yeah, right. So if I might have this wrong, and we'll get corrected in email, but they capture a Terminator, they reprogram it, and send it back to protect Sarah Connor and her son, who later
Yeah.
becomes a big. So
Yeah.
that's, I think.
Oh, I thought he was
Yeah.
a T800.
Oh, maybe he is. No, the T800s, I think, are if they're the ones who get detected by dogs, then
Oh.
I think that's an earlier version, though. Their versioning nomenclature doesn't make sense.
That would make sense
Hmm.
if there's some liquid metal, right? Like they're going to smell very different. That'd be a good way to see them differently, is have a dog with a good sniffer.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Well, the T1000, that's the liquid metal.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, I have no idea then.
That's
Well,
Robert
yeah.
Patrick.
So we'll get someone to set us straight on social media or email, and
There you go.
and we'll get it sorted out. What year did the Terminators come from?
2049?
1997.
Who said 29?
I said 49,
Oh,
but I could pretend to
This is
say 29.
all right. Way to go, Kevin. 2029 is correct.
Hey.
That was well done. Good. And who is the best Terminator that we've managed to meet?
Robert Patrick, of course.
There you go.
Since we've met him and not Schwarzenegger.
And he didn't hurt us.
And he didn't hurt us.
He didn't hurt us. Nice guy.
Nice guy. Didn't chase us.
Looked like it really did. He really did look like he was going to hurt you guys. But no, we met him at FedEx Expo. Super nice guy. And that's trivia for this week.
Nicely done. All right.
All right.
Cool.
The fifth season by N.K. Jemisin. If you like fantasy and science fiction, please read it. It's kind of just one of those books that you've got to read, so get that under your belt. Thank you again, Sarah, for joining us. We really appreciate having you. Next episode, next week, we have a conversation with David Brin. Please tune in for that one. Until next time.